The fluorescent lights of the emergency department hummed with a frequency that only Talia seemed to hear, a low-grade mosquito whine that burrowed into the base of her skull. At 27, wearing light blue scrubs that were 2 sizes too big, a deliberate choice to hide the athletic, coiled tension of her frame, she looked like exactly what Dr. Eris Thorne said she was, a diversity hire who belonged in the cafeteria, not the trauma bay. She stood by the nurse's station, clutching a clipboard to her chest, her dark eyes lowered as Thorne berated her in front of the morning shift. The air smelled of rubbing alcohol and stale coffee, a sterile purgatory where hierarchy was the only religion. Thorne was tall, blonde, and possessed the kind of jawline that suggested he had never been told no in his entire life. He flicked the chart in Talia's hand, the paper rattling aggressively. "I asked for the vitals on the tachycardia patient in bed 4, Nurse Williams," Thorne sneered, his voice carrying down the hallway, ensuring the other nurses, the giggling chorus who nicknamed her the Ghost, could hear every syllable. Not a dissertation on his dietary habits. "You are here to record numbers, not to think. Thinking requires equipment you clearly lack." Talia didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just adjusted her grip on the plastic clipboard, her knuckles not even whitening, her expression a mask of practiced vacuity. "The patient isn't just tachycardic, doctor," she said, her voice soft, barely a whisper, forcing him to lean in, which only annoyed him more. "His pulse pressure is narrowing. I suspect a pericardial effusion." The dietary note was regarding his high sodium intake, which complicates the... Thorne cut her off with a laugh that sounded like dry ice cracking. He looked around at the other staff, inviting them to share in the joke. "Dr. Thorne," he corrected, pointing a manicured finger at his ID badge. "And if I want a diagnosis, I'll ask a doctor. Go empty the bedpans in the staging area. That seems more your speed. Do not speak to me again unless the building is on fire." As he turned his back, dismissing her like she was furniture, Talia's eyes shifted. For a microsecond, the submissive mask slipped, revealing a predatory sharpness, a cold calculation that assessed Thorne's jugular, his stance, and the 3 seconds it would take to dismantle his ego permanently. But she exhaled, the moment passing, and walked silently toward the sluice room. She was good at being invisible. It was the only way to stay alive after what she had left behind. But the universe, it seemed, had no intention of letting her stay hidden in the shadows of the linen closet. The disruption began not with a scream, but with a vibration. It started in the floorboards, a subtle trembling that rattled the instruments on the metal trays in Trauma 1. Talia paused, her hands deep in a sink of soapy water, and tilted her head. It wasn't an earthquake. The rhythm was too consistent. It was a thrumming, a rhythmic beating of the air that grew louder with every heartbeat.
Reitevais.
The realization hit her with the familiarity of an old scar. Outside the sliding glass doors of the ambulance bay, the bright, cloudless skies suddenly darkened, not by clouds, but by a massive, descending shadow. The wind picked up instantly, whipping debris across the parking lot, sending trash cans skittering into parked cars. Inside the ER, the confusion was immediate. Alarms on the monitors blipped erratically as the power flickered. Dr. Thorne looked up from his tablet, his face twisting in annoyance. "What is that racket?" he barked, as if he could demand the noise to cease by sheer force of personality. "Security, find out who is drilling outside and shut it down." But it wasn't a drill. It was the roar of a heavy transport helicopter, a sleek, black beast of a machine that had no business being in a civilian zone, plummeting toward the pavement right outside the main entrance. Talia dried her hands slowly, her movements precise. While the other nurses ran to the windows, pressing their faces against the glass, and patients began to shout in panic, she moved to the crash cart. She checked the seal on the defibrillator. She counted the epinephrine ampoules. She knew that sound. That wasn't a medevac. That was a private extraction bird, flying low and hard, pushing the engine to the red line. The sound went from a thrum to a deafening roar that shook the dust from the ceiling tiles. The glass doors of the entrance rattled violently in their frames. Outside, the black helicopter flared hard, the skids screeching against the asphalt mere inches from the sliding doors, kicking up a storm of grit and exhaust fumes that blocked out the sun. The sheer audacity of the landing froze everyone in the lobby. This wasn't protocol. This was an invasion. The engine didn't shut down. The rotors kept spinning, a deadly halo of noise that screamed urgency. The side door of the chopper slid open before the skids even settled, and men in dark suits spilled out, moving with the chaotic, desperate energy of soldiers who were losing a battle. In the center of the storm, a man jumped out, carrying another body in his arms. He didn't duck under the rotors. He walked tall, his face a portrait of terrified fury. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than the hospital, but the white dress shirt was soaked in crimson. The sliding doors were forced open by the sheer force of the entourage, the automatic sensors overwhelmed. The wind from the rotors blasted into the sterile hallway, sending papers flying like confetti and blowing the sterile caps off the nurses' heads. Leading the charge was the man in the bloody suit, Jason. He was striking, with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes that burned with a lethal intensity, but right now, he looked like a man watching his world burn. He cradled a younger man in his arms, a boy really, whose chest was a ruin of torn fabric and dark, oozing blood. "Help!" Jason roared, his voice cracking, raw with emotion that cut through the mechanical scream of the helicopter outside. "I need a surgeon. Now." Behind him, 3 large men with earpieces and bulges under their jackets formed a perimeter, their eyes scanning the lobby for threats, effectively taking the waiting room hostage with their presence. Dr. Thorne, recovering from his initial shock, puffed out his chest and marched forward, his white coat flapping in the dying wind of the rotor wash. He held up a hand, the universal gesture for stop, completely misreading the room. "You cannot bring a vehicle like that here," Thorne shouted, his voice shrill. "This is a place of healing, not a hangar. You are violating federal airspace regulations and hospital protocol. Get that man out of here and call 911 like a normal person." Jason didn't even slow down. He marched straight up to Thorne, his eyes wild, and shoved the doctor aside with his shoulder, sending the man stumbling into a row of plastic chairs. "He is dying," Jason screamed, laying the boy onto the nearest gurney, his hand shaking as he pressed a silk handkerchief into the wound. "I don't care about your protocols. Save him, or I will burn this building down with everyone inside." The threat wasn't hyperbolic. The cold steel in his tone suggested he had the means and the will to do exactly that. The security guards, 2 older men named Gary and Bob who were used to breaking up drunken arguments, stood frozen, their hands hovering uselessly over their tasers, paralyzed by the aura of violence radiating from the newcomers. Thorne scrambled to his feet, his face red with humiliation. "Security! Remove them," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "I will not be threatened in my own hospital. This is a criminal matter." The nurses backed away, terrified. The ghost remained by the crash cart, watching. She saw what Thorne missed. She saw the way the blood was pumping, bright red, spurting in time with a fading heart. She saw the pallor of the boy's skin, turning from alabaster to gray. Protocol was death. Time was a luxury they didn't have. Thorne approached the gurney, not to help, but to obstruct. He placed a hand on the rail, blocking the path to the trauma bay. "I said get out," Thorne hissed, his ego overriding his survival instinct. "We do not treat gangsters who storm in here like animals." "You are compromising the sterility of my unit." Jason looked at Thorne, and for a second, he looked ready to draw the weapon that was clearly tucked into his waistband. The desperation in the handsome man's face was heartbreaking, a king begging a peasant for water. "Please," Jason whispered, the fight draining out of him as fear took over. "He's my brother." He's not breathing right," Thorne sneered, sensing weakness. "Then he should have made better life choices. Move him." Now, that was